The blistering sun glared down on Gabriela Parson as she clutched the wicker basket closer to her chest, her knuckles white with determination. The winds howled across the Colorado plains, threatening to tear the bonnet from her head as she urged her chestnut mare forward through the gathering storm. Dinner would get cold, and after 3 days without seeing Owen Lawson, she refused to let something as trivial as a dust storm keep them apart any longer. Aurora, Colorado, 1873, was no place for the faint of heart. The mining town had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, bringing with it the usual mix of hopeful settlers, hardened miners, and those looking to profit off both. Gabriela had arrived 2 years prior with her father, who'd come seeking fortune but found only an early grave from pneumonia instead. At 22, she'd managed to keep their small homestead running through sheer force of will and the occasional kindness of neighbors. The wind picked up even more, stinging her face with sand and grit. The darkening sky promised more than just dust. A summer storm was brewing. Most sensible folks would turn back, head for shelter. But Owen hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, working as he was at the furthest edge of his property, mending fences and keeping watch for cattle rustlers. "Just a little further, Maple," Gabriela whispered to her horse, leaning forward in the saddle. The basket contained still warm beef stew, fresh baked bread, and apple pie, Owen's favorite. She'd risen before dawn to prepare it all, determined to surprise him. The first drops of rain began to fall as she crested a hill, and there in the distance she could see the small line shack where Owen had been staying. Relief washed through her at the sight of smoke curling from the chimney. He was there, safe. Owen Lawson had come to Aurora with little more than the clothes on his back and dreams as vast as the western sky. At 26, he'd managed to build a respectable cattle operation through backbreaking work and a stubborn refusal to fail. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he'd captured Gabriela's attention from the first moment she'd seen him tipping his hat to ladies on Aurora's main street. She hadn't intended to fall for him. After her father's death, Gabriela had focused solely on survival. But Owen had appeared at her door one day, offering to help repair her roof before the winter snows. His kindness, offered without expectation of anything in return, had cracked the careful wall she'd built around her heart. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and lightning cracked across the sky as she approached the cabin. She was soaked to the skin, her carefully prepared meal protected only by the oilcloth she'd wrapped around the basket. The door of the cabin flew open before she'd even dismounted, and Owen stood there, disbelief etched across his features. "Gabriela," he shouted above the wind, rushing toward her. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here?" She slid from the saddle, clutching the basket. "You need to eat," she said simply, her teeth chattering from the cold. Owen stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head in wonder. Taking the basket with one hand, he wrapped his other arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the cabin. "You rode through this wild wind to bring me dinner?" he asked, his voice filled with astonishment as they stepped inside the humble shelter. The fire cast warm light across the single room, making it feel instantly safer than the chaos outside. "You're braver than me, Gabriela. I wouldn't have ridden 5 feet in this weather." Her heart warmed at his words, even as she shivered in her drenched clothes. "It's nothing," she insisted, though they both knew it was far from the truth. Owen set the basket down carefully on his small wooden table, then turned back to her, his expression serious. "It's everything," he corrected softly. "No one's ever done anything like that for me before." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a woolen blanket. "You need to get warm," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "I've got coffee brewing. Sit by the fire while I tend to your horse." "But the food," she protested. "Will wait," Owen finished firmly. "You're more important." As he disappeared back into the storm to lead Maple to the small lean-to shelter beside the cabin, Gabriela sank onto the bench by the fire, suddenly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. She hadn't planned this, hadn't intended for their relationship to deepen beyond the careful friendship they'd maintained. But riding through that storm had been about more than bringing him dinner. It had been about following her heart, no matter the obstacles. Owen returned minutes later, drenched himself now. He added wood to the fire, making it blaze higher, then poured them each a cup of coffee. "Why did you really come, Gabriela?" he asked quietly, sitting beside her on the bench. She looked into the dancing flames, gathering her courage. "Because I couldn't bear another day without seeing you," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. "Because every time you ride away, a piece of my heart goes with you." The confession hung between them, as delicate and powerful as a lightning strike. Owen set his coffee cup aside and gently took her hand in his. "I've been fighting these feelings," he confessed. "A cattle rancher with nothing but dreams to his name has no right to court a woman like you." "A woman like me?" she questioned. "Owen, I'm just trying to keep my father's homestead from falling apart. I'm no high society lady." "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "And the most beautiful inside and out." The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's windows, but inside, time seemed to stand still. Owen reached up, gently brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "I've wanted to do this since the first day I saw you," he whispered, and then he leaned forward, pressing his lips softly against hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Gabriela responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more powerful. All the unspoken feelings of the past months poured into that one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I'm in love with you, Gabriela Parson. Have been for a long time now." Tears of happiness sprang to her eyes. "And I love you, Owen Lawson, enough to ride through any storm to find you." He laughed softly, the sound warming her more than the fire ever could. "Then I reckon we'd better eat that dinner you brought before it gets any colder. Because I aim to court you properly, starting tonight." As they shared the meal by firelight, with the storm raging outside but unable to touch the warmth growing between them, Gabriela knew that some journeys were worth every hardship along the way. She'd ridden through the wild wind to bring him dinner, but she'd found so much more. She'd found her future. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean world and skies of perfect blue. Owen insisted on escorting Gabriela back to her homestead, riding beside her through meadows where wildflowers glistened with raindrops. "I'll speak to Reverend Thomas about putting up the bands," Owen said as they approached her property. "That is, if you're certain about this." Gabriela reined in her horse, turning to face him fully. "More certain than I've ever been about anything," she answered without hesitation. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Ranching is a hard life, especially in these parts. The winters are brutal, and there's always the threat of rustlers or drought." She smiled, reaching across to touch his hand where it rested on his saddle horn. "I know what hardship is, Owen, but I also know that facing it with the right person makes all the difference." He nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "You really are the bravest woman I've ever known." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just in love." As they continued toward her homestead, the future spreading before them as vast as the Colorado sky, neither could know the challenges that awaited them. But in that moment, with the morning sun warming their faces and their hearts full of newfound love, those challenges seemed like nothing they couldn't overcome together. Word spread quickly through Aurora about Owen and Gabriela's courtship. Most folks approved they were both well-liked in the community, though some questioned the wisdom of two struggling homesteaders joining forces when neither had much to their name. "People will talk," Martha Wilson, the shopkeeper's wife, warned Gabriela as she purchased flour and sugar, saying you're only marrying him for his land, or he's taking your property. Gabriela straightened her spine. "People can talk all they want, Mrs. Wilson. Owen and I know the truth." The truth was that their love had blossomed rapidly in the weeks following that stormy evening. Owen rode to Gabriela's homestead every day he could spare from his ranch work, helping her with repairs and joining her for dinner. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, and the life they hoped to build together. "I want to expand the herd," Owen told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "With your land and mine combined, we could run twice as many cattle. In 5 years, we might be the largest operation in these parts. And a family." Gabriela asked softly, "Is that part of your plan too?" Owen took her hand, his expression growing tender. "A house full of children with your smile and spirit. That's the dream that keeps me working from sunup to sundown." Their wedding was set for the first Sunday in September, giving them time to prepare both properties and gather the necessary supplies for winter. But as so often happens on the frontier, their carefully laid plans were soon tested by unexpected challenges. The first came in the form of Thaddeus Morgan, a wealthy cattle baron from the eastern part of the state who'd been buying up properties throughout the territory. He arrived in Aurora with an entourage of hired men, setting up in the town's only hotel and making his intentions clear. "I aim to establish the largest cattle empire Colorado has ever seen," he announced in the saloon that first evening, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Fair prices for any who wish to sell, those who don't." He let the sentence hang unfinished, but his meaning was clear enough. Owen was present that night, having come to town for supplies. He listened quietly, nursing a single whiskey as Morgan held court. It wasn't until the cattle baron specifically mentioned that pretty little homestead on the eastern creek, Gabriela's land, that Owen felt his blood begin to boil. "That land's not for sale," he said, loud enough to be heard over the murmur of conversations. The room fell silent as Morgan turned to face him. "Every property has its price, Cowboy," he said dismissively. "And I understand that particular homestead belongs to a young woman alone. She'll see reason." Owen set his glass down carefully. "That young woman is my fiancée, Mr. Morgan, and neither her land nor mine is available at any price." Morgan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fiancée, is it? Well, congratulations. But marriage is an expensive proposition, especially for a small-time rancher. My offer might help you start your life together more comfortably." "We'll manage just fine," Owen replied, his tone final as he stood to leave. "Good evening, gentlemen." As he walked out into the cool night air, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that Morgan wasn't a man accustomed to taking no for an answer. He mounted his horse and rode straight to Gabriela's, despite the late hour. She was still awake, reading by lamplight, when his knock came at the door. The concern on his face told her immediately that something was wrong. "Thaddeus Morgan," she said after he explained. "Yes, I've heard of him. My father once said he doesn't build his empire, he steals it piece by piece." "He's set his sights on your land," Owen confirmed, pacing the small main room of her cabin. "And probably mine too, though he didn't say as much." Gabriela watched him, her expression calm despite the news. "Then we'll face him together, just as we plan to face everything else." Owen stopped pacing, struck once again by her courage. This could get dangerous, Gabriela. Morgan doesn't just bring money, he brings men willing to do his dirty work. All the more reason to accelerate our plans, she said decisively. Why wait until September? Let's be married next Sunday. Her suggestion caught him off guard. Are you sure? What about the preparations, the celebration you wanted? She crossed the room to him, taking both his hands in hers. What I want is to be your wife, Owen Lawson. Everything else is just details. His heart swelled with love for this remarkable woman. Next Sunday it is, then. They were married in Aurora's small church with only a handful of friends in attendance. Gabriela wore her mother's blue dress rather than the white gown she'd been saving to make. Owen had a new shirt but wore his usual work pants and boots. What the ceremony lacked in grandeur, it made up for in sincerity and joy. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thomas declared, beaming at the couple. May your union be blessed with love, prosperity, and many happy years together. The small reception was held at the town's cafe, with everyone contributing dishes for the celebration. Even in their haste, the community had rallied around them, offering gifts and well wishes. To the bravest couple in Colorado territory, Sheriff Davis toasted, raising his glass. May your cattle be fat and your children be many. Laughter and cheers followed as Owen and Gabriela shared a kiss, both glowing with happiness despite the circumstances that had hastened their wedding day. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Gabriela's cabin, which they'd decided would be their home while they worked both properties. Owen had brought his few possessions over that morning, including the handcrafted rocking chair his father had made, now placed beside the fire as a wedding gift to his bride. It's not much of a honeymoon, he apologized as they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest. Someday I'll take you to Denver, maybe even all the way to San Francisco. This is perfect, she assured him, tracing her fingers along his arm. I don't need fancy hotels or restaurants, I just need you. The peace of that moment was shattered the very next morning by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Owen was already outside, checking the chicken coop, when 3 riders appeared, 2 of Morgan's men flanking the cattle baron himself. Mr. Lawson, Morgan called, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. And Mrs. Lawson now, I hear. Congratulations on your hasty nuptials. Gabriela appeared in the doorway of the cabin, her expression wary but unafraid. What can we do for you, Mr. Morgan? Owen asked, moving to stand between the riders and his wife. Morgan smiled, though the expression never reached his cold eyes. Just paying a neighborly visit, and making one final offer for these combined properties. $5,000 cash for both parcels. More than fair, considering the condition of the buildings and the limited grazing available. It was an enormous sum, enough to establish them comfortably elsewhere, perhaps even closer to civilization. For a brief moment, Owen considered what such money could mean for their future, for the children they hoped to have. But then he felt Gabriela move beside him, her hand slipping into his, and remembered all they had discussed about their dreams for this land. As I said in town, Mr. Morgan, neither of these properties is for sale, not at any price. The cattle baron's smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Lawson. A young couple like you could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunities. Our opportunities are right here, Gabriela spoke up, her voice steady. This is our home. Morgan studied her for a long moment, then shifted his attention back to Owen. Women often don't understand the practical realities of business. Perhaps you should discuss this privately with your new bride. My wife understands perfectly, Owen replied, his tone hardening. And she speaks for both of us. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. For a tense moment, it seemed Morgan might say more, but instead he merely nodded to his men. "Very well. But remember, circumstances change. My offer won't remain open indefinitely." As they rode away, Owen felt Gabriela trembling slightly beside him despite her brave front. "He won't give up," she said softly. Owen wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Neither will we." The following weeks brought a series of escalating troubles. First, a section of fence on Owen's property was cut, allowing a dozen of his cattle to wander onto neighboring land. Then, their well mysteriously silted up overnight, requiring days of backbreaking work to clear. Most disturbing was the fire that started in their hay barn, spotted just in time by Gabriela before it could spread to the main structures. None of these incidents could be directly tied to Morgan, who maintained a polite distance, often seen dining at the hotel restaurant or conducting business in the saloon. But Owen and Gabriela had no doubts about the source of their troubles. "He's trying to wear us down," Owen said grimly after they'd spent an entire day rounding up scattered cattle. "Make life so difficult we'll reconsider his offer." Gabriela wiped sweat from her brow, determination etched in every line of her face. "Then he doesn't know who he's dealing with." Their resistance might have continued indefinitely, if not for the arrival of unexpected allies. 3 neighboring ranchers' men who had initially kept their distance from the conflict rode up to their property one evening as Owen and Gabriela were finishing their chores. "Heard about your troubles," Frank Miller, the oldest of the 3, said without preamble. "Same things happened to Peterson last year before Morgan drove him out, and the Wilcox place before that." "We kept our heads down," admitted Thomas Reed, the youngest rancher. "Figured it wasn't our fight. But if Morgan gets your land, ours will be next. He won't stop until he owns the whole valley." "What are you proposing?" Owen asked, eyeing the men cautiously. "An alliance," said James Cooper, whose ranch bordered Gabriela's property to the south. "We stand together, watch each other's land. Make it clear to Morgan that he can't pick us off one by one." The proposal was exactly what they needed, and over coffee in their small kitchen, the 5 of them formulated a plan. They would establish regular patrols, ensure that no property was left unattended, and make their alliance known publicly in town. "Morgan has money and hired guns," Cooper acknowledged, "but we have something stronger roots in this land and community." The strategy worked better than they could have hoped. With 5 ranches now allied against him, Morgan's tactics became more difficult to implement. His men were spotted and turned away from property lines. When a mysterious illness affected some of Owen's cattle, the allied ranchers contributed healthy stock to replace the losses. The community of Aurora began to take sides as well, with most supporting the local ranchers against the outsider trying to build an empire at their expense. The shopkeepers extended credit during hard times. The blacksmith prioritized repair work for the allied ranches, and even Sheriff Davis made a point of riding out to check on their properties more frequently. Morgan, sensing the shift in public sentiment, changed tactics. Rather than continuing the harassment, he began making individual offers to the members of the alliance, hoping to find a weak link. When that failed, he attempted to cut off their access to markets by negotiating exclusive contracts with the buyers who typically purchased their cattle. Through it all, Owen and Gabriela's relationship only grew stronger. The hardships they faced together forged a bond that neither Morgan nor any other force could break. Each night, exhausted from the day's work and vigilance, they would hold each other close, drawing strength from their love and shared purpose. "He can't fight us forever," Owen assured her one evening as they sat by the fire, making plans for the spring calving. "He'll eventually realize there are easier targets elsewhere." Gabriela nodded, though worry still creased her brow. I just hope it's soon. I have news that changes everything. Owen looked up from the ledger where he'd been calculating feed requirements. What news? Her smile was radiant as she took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. We're going to have a baby, Owen, in about 7 months, according to Mrs. Cooper. The ledger slid forgotten to the floor as Owen stared at her in wonder, then let out a joyous whoop that likely carried all the way to town. He lifted Gabriela from her chair, spinning her around carefully before setting her back on her feet and kissing her with all the love in his heart. A baby, he whispered against her lips. Our baby. In that perfect moment, the struggles with Morgan seemed distant and unimportant. What mattered was this miracle, this new life they had created together. But reality intruded the very next day when news reached them that Morgan had purchased the mortgage on Cooper's ranch from the bank in Denver. With one stroke of his pen, the cattle baron had gained the power to foreclose on their strongest ally if payments were even a day late. This changes things, Cooper admitted grimly when they gathered at his ranch to discuss the development. He'll find any excuse to call in the note. Then we make sure he doesn't get that excuse, Owen insisted. Between all of us, we can cover your payments if needed. The others nodded in agreement, but the mood had shifted. Morgan had found a new weapon in his arsenal, and they all knew that banks held mortgages on most of their properties as well. Gabriela, who had remained quiet during most of the discussion, finally spoke up. We need to change our approach, she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Fighting Morgan directly isn't working. We need to understand what he really wants. He wants our land, Miller said bluntly. But why? Gabriela pressed. There's plenty of open range further east, easier to acquire. Why is he so fixated on this valley specifically? It was a question none of them had considered deeply, too caught up in the immediate struggle to wonder about Morgan's underlying motivations. The railroad, Reed said suddenly, realization dawning on his face. There've been surveyors through here twice in the past year. My cousin works for the Denver Pacific. He mentioned they're planning a new spur line to connect the mining operations. And if Morgan controls the land where they want to build. Owen continued, seeing the picture clearly now. He could make a fortune selling right-of-way access, Cooper finished, or building his own shipping yards. This new understanding changed everything. Morgan wasn't just building a cattle empire, he was positioning himself to profit enormously from the coming railroad expansion. No wonder he had been so persistent, so willing to invest in pushing them out. If the railroad is what he's after, then perhaps there's a way to beat him at his own game, Gabriela suggested, a plan already forming in her mind. The next morning, Owen rode to town with a specific purpose. Rather than confronting Morgan directly, he sought out Harold Parker, the telegrapher who handled all communication in and out of Aurora. Need to send an urgent wire to the Denver Pacific Railroad Company, Owen explained, sliding a carefully worded message across the counter. And I'd appreciate your discretion about this matter. Parker, who had no love for Morgan after being shortchanged on several telegrams, nodded his understanding. Mum's the word, Mr. Lawson. I'll send this right away. The message was an invitation to the railroad executives to meet with representatives of the Aurora Valley Landowners Association, a group that didn't yet exist, but soon would. Owen proposed to discuss right-of-way access across their combined properties at terms more favorable than they might receive elsewhere. It was a gamble, but one based on solid reasoning. If Morgan was speculating on railroad access, then bypassing him entirely and dealing directly with the railroad company might undercut his entire strategy. The response came faster than anyone expected. 2 days later, Parker delivered a telegram to the Lawson Ranch announcing that J.W. Hathaway, Vice President of Route Development for the Denver Pacific, would arrive in Aurora the following week to discuss their proposal. News of the pending visit spread through the town, despite Parker's attempts at discretion. Morgan, learning of the development, wasted no time in confronting Owen outside the general store. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lawson," he warned, his usual veneer of politeness gone. "The railroad will deal with men of substance and capital, not struggling ranchers barely keeping their heads above water." Owen regarded him calmly, unintimidated. "Then you have nothing to worry about, do you, Mr. Morgan? May the best proposal win." The days leading up to Hathaway's arrival were filled with frantic preparation. The Allied ranchers formed their association officially, with Owen elected as president due to his initiative in contacting the railroad. Gabriela, whose quick mind and education exceeded most in the group, was named secretary and charged with preparing the formal proposal. They worked day and night, mapping the most efficient routes across their combined properties, calculating fair pricing for right-of-way access, and even identifying potential locations for a modest depot that would serve the community's needs without requiring extensive additional construction. "The key is to show them we're not just ranchers but forward-thinking business partners," Gabriela explained as they reviewed the final documents. "We're offering stability and local knowledge that Morgan can't match." J.W. Hathaway arrived on the Tuesday morning stage, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Morgan was waiting at the hotel to intercept him, but to everyone's surprise, Hathaway declined his dinner invitation in favor of meeting immediately with the Landowners Association. The meeting was held in the church, the only building in town large enough to accommodate all the ranchers comfortably. Gabriela had insisted on attending despite her condition, which was beginning to show slightly to those who knew to look. "Mr. Hathaway," Owen began once everyone was seated, "we appreciate you taking the time to consider our proposal. We understand the Denver Pacific is planning a spur line through this region to service the mining operations, and we believe our combined properties offer the most logical and cost-effective route." Hathaway nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "That's my understanding as well, Mr. Lawson. Though I must say, Mr. Morgan has already made a compelling offer for exclusive routing through properties he either owns or expects to acquire shortly." A murmur ran through the assembled ranchers at this confirmation of their suspicions. "With respect, sir," Gabriela spoke up, rising to her feet with the proposal in hand, "Mr. Morgan's expectations regarding land acquisition in this valley are greatly exaggerated. As you can see from these maps, our association controls over 80% of the viable route options between Aurora and the mining districts." She spread the maps on the table before Hathaway, who leaned forward with increased interest. "Furthermore," she continued, "our proposal includes not only right-of-way access at 15% below the rates Mr. Morgan has likely quoted, but also community support for the depot location and guaranteed cattle shipping contracts from all member ranches for the next 10 years. Hathaway studied the maps and the detailed proposal for several long minutes while the room remained silent. Finally, he looked up, a new respect evident in his expression. "This is remarkably thorough, Mrs. Lawson, most impressive." He closed the folder and addressed the entire group. "I won't make any decisions today, but I can tell you that the Denver Pacific values local cooperation highly. A contentious right-of-way acquisition can delay construction by years and add substantially to costs." He stood, gathering his papers. I'll need to take this back to the board in Denver. You'll have our answer within 2 weeks. It was neither a victory nor a defeat, but as the ranchers filed out of the church, there was a new sense of hope among them. They had presented a united front and a compelling alternative to Morgan's machinations. Morgan himself was waiting outside, his face darkening as he observed the cautiously optimistic expressions of the departing ranchers. He cornered Hathaway before the railroad man could return to the hotel. "Whatever they are offering, I'll better it by 20%, he said without preamble. "And I can guarantee a trouble-free acquisition process." Hathaway regarded him coolly. "The Denver Pacific makes decisions based on the overall value proposition, Mr. Morgan, not just the lowest initial price. Good day." The wait for the railroad's decision was agonizing. Morgan, clearly unsettled by the turn of events, increased pressure on the allied ranchers through legal channels challenging water rights, disputing boundary lines, and filing complaints about stray cattle. But he refrained from the more direct harassment tactics of before, perhaps wary of antagonizing the railroad executives. 13 days after Hathaway's visit, Parker the telegrapher rode out to the Lawson ranch personally, a sealed envelope in hand. "Just came through," he said, handing it to Owen with barely contained excitement. "Marked urgent from Denver Pacific headquarters." Owen and Gabriela retreated to the privacy of their cabin before opening the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the railroad's ornate letterhead. "Dear Mr. Lawson and members of the Aurora Valley Landowners Association," Owen read aloud, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "After careful consideration of all proposals, the Board of Directors of the Denver Pacific Railroad is pleased to accept your offer of right-of-way access, as outlined in your detailed presentation." Gabriela let out a cry of joy, throwing her arms around his neck as he continued reading the terms of acceptance, which were even more favorable than they had dared hope. The railroad not only accepted their routing proposal but agreed to build a proper depot in Aurora and establish regular passenger service in addition to the freight operations. "We did it," Owen whispered, holding his wife close. "We actually did it." Word spread quickly through the alliance, and then the town. By evening, a spontaneous celebration had erupted at the café, with the ranchers and their families joined by townspeople who recognized the economic opportunity the railroad would bring to Aurora. Morgan was conspicuously absent from the festivities. Reports indicated he had been seen boarding the eastbound stage that afternoon, his expression thunderous and his future in the region uncertain at best. The victory changed everything for Owen and Gabriela. The guaranteed income from the right-of-way agreement provided financial stability they had never known before. More importantly, the alliance they had formed with their neighbors created a support network that would prove invaluable in the coming years. As winter settled over the Colorado plains, bringing with it a peaceful blanket of snow, the Lawsons prepared for both the spring calving season and the arrival of their first child. The cabin, once feeling spacious for two, now seemed too small for their growing family. With the railroad money, they began planning an expansion, adding 2 proper bedrooms and enlarging the main living area. "You ever think about that night?" Owen asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Gabriela's fingers busy with knitting a tiny blanket. "The storm when you rode through that wild wind to bring me dinner," she smiled, looking up from her work. "Sometimes it seems like another lifetime ago." "You changed everything that night," he said softly. "When I said you were braver than me, I meant it. I'd never known anyone with your kind of courage, not just facing the storm, but facing life head-on, no matter what it throws at you." Gabriela set aside her knitting and moved to sit beside him in the large rocking chair, his arms automatically opening to welcome her. "We're brave together," she corrected, resting her head against his chest. "That's what makes us strong." On a clear, cold morning in February 1874, their daughter came into the world after a long and difficult labor. Owen had never felt so helpless as during those tense hours, pacing outside the bedroom where Mrs. Cooper and the town's doctor attended to Gabriela. When the baby's first cry finally pierced the air, he nearly collapsed with relief. "She's perfect," Gabriela whispered when he was finally allowed in, tears of joy streaming down her face as she cradled their newborn. "10 fingers, 10 toes, and your eyes, I think." "And your spirit, God help us all," Owen teased gently, his own eyes moist as he carefully took the tiny bundle into his arms. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed various options but never settled on a final choice. Now, looking down at their daughter's face, Gabriela knew. "Hope," she said simply, "because that's what she represents for us, for this land and our future here." Owen nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. Hope Elizabeth Lawson would be the first of 4 children born to them over the next 8 years, followed by twin boys, Samuel and James, and finally, another daughter, Grace. Each birth strengthened their bond and deepened their commitment to the life they were building together. The railroad arrived in Aurora in the spring of 1875, transforming the once isolated mining town into a bustling hub of commerce. The depot, built on land contributed by the Landowners Association, became the center of community life. Twice-weekly passenger service connected them to Denver and beyond, while daily freight trains carried ore from the mines and cattle from the surrounding ranches. Owen and Gabriela's operation flourished with this new access to markets. They gradually expanded their herd, hired reliable hands to help with the increasing workload, and completed the renovations to their home, now a proper ranch house with a wide porch where they could watch the Colorado sunsets together. Thaddeus Morgan never returned to Aurora. Rumors suggested he had moved on to Wyoming territory, seeking new opportunities after his Colorado ambitions were thwarted. Occasionally, news of his activities would reach them through business connections or travelers passing through. But he remained a distant figure from their past, no longer a threat to the life they had built. The Landowners Association, formed out of necessity to combat Morgan's schemes, evolved into a powerful force for the region's development. Under Owen's leadership, and with Gabriela's administrative skills, it helped establish the area's first proper school, recruited a permanent doctor for the growing community, and even negotiated favorable banking terms for local businesses and ranchers. In the summer of 1883, 10 years after that fateful stormy evening, the Lawsons hosted a celebration at their ranch. The occasion was the Alliance's anniversary, but it had grown to include nearly everyone in Aurora and the surrounding areas. Tables laden with food stretched across their front yard. A band played lively tunes for dancing, and children, including their own brood, ran laughing through the crowd. As evening approached, Owen found Gabriela standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching their eldest daughter, Hope, now 9, teaching the younger children a ring game. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, a contented smile on her face. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, not just us, but all of it." She gestured to the thriving community around them, from that tiny cabin and a handful of cattle to all of this. Owen nodded, following her gaze across their property to the distant mountains, now turning purple in the evening light. "We built something good here, something that will last." "And to think," she said with a laugh. "It all started because I was stubborn enough to ride through a storm with a basket of food." "Brave," he corrected, turning her to face him. "Not stubborn. The bravest thing I've ever seen." Gabriela's eyes softened as she reached up to touch his cheek, still handsome despite the lines that 10 years of Colorado sun and wind had etched there. "I'd do it again," she whispered. "Every bit of it." Owen bent to kiss her, not caring who might be watching. After a decade of marriage, his love for this remarkable woman had only deepened, tempered by shared struggles and joys into something unbreakable. "So would I," he agreed when they parted. Then, with a mischievous glint in his eye, he added, "Though next time, maybe wait until after the storm passes to deliver dinner." Her laughter rang out across the ranch, drawing smiles from their guests. Hand in hand, they rejoined the celebration, surrounded by the community they had helped build, and the family they had created together, living proof that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single brave ride through the wild wind. As the years passed, the Lawson Ranch became one of the most prosperous in Colorado. Their cattle operation expanded to include breeding stock sought after throughout the West for their hardiness and quality. The railroad connection allowed them to ship directly to markets in Denver, Kansas City, and beyond, commanding premium prices and building a reputation for reliability that opened doors to even larger contracts. But it wasn't just material success that marked their lives. Owen and Gabriela became pillars of the community, their home a gathering place for neighbors and travelers alike. Their children grew strong and capable in the freedom of the ranch, each developing unique talents while absorbing the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion their parents embodied. Hope, their firstborn, showed an early aptitude for business that rivaled her mother's. By 16, she was keeping the ranch books and suggesting innovations that even Owen hadn't considered. The twins, Samuel and James, were natural horsemen and seemed happiest working with the cattle on the open range. Young Grace inherited her father's quiet thoughtfulness along with her mother's determination, often found with her nose in a book, but equally comfortable in the saddle when needed. In the spring of 1890, as Aurora prepared for its annual Founders' Day celebration, 17-year-old Hope approached her parents with an announcement that took them both by surprise. "I've been accepted to attend college in Denver," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she handed them the letter that had arrived on the morning train. "Professor Martin says I have a natural mind for economics and business law. He wrote a recommendation." Owen and Gabriela exchanged glances, processing this unexpected development. No woman from Aurora had ever gone to college before. It was unconventional, even controversial. "It would mean living in Denver," Owen said carefully. "That's a big step, Hope." "I know, Pa," she replied, her chin lifting in a gesture so reminiscent of Gabriela that it made his heart ache. "But I want to learn more than I can here. I want to understand how to build on what you and Ma have created." Gabriela reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Your father and I always wanted you children to have opportunities we never had," she said softly. "If this is your dream, then we'll find a way to make it happen." The decision wasn't made lightly. Arrangements were made for Hope to board with the family of Owen's former business associate in Denver, who had a daughter of similar age also attending the college. The expense was considerable, but the ranch could bear it now, testament to how far they had come from those early struggling days. On the morning Hope was to depart, Gabriela found Owen standing alone in the barn, ostensibly checking harnesses but clearly lost in thought. "She'll be fine," Gabriela assured him, slipping her arm through his. Hope has more sense at 17 than most have at twice that age. I know, he sighed, turning to face his wife. Gray now streaked his once dark hair and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Gabriela, he was still the handsome cowboy who had stolen her heart nearly 20 years before. It's not really that. It's just, where did the time go? Seems like yesterday she was that tiny bundle we named for our future. And now she is our future, Gabriela replied, taking what we built and carrying it forward in ways we couldn't even imagine. Hope's departure marked a new chapter for the Lawson family. The twins, now 15, stepped up to take on more responsibility around the ranch. Grace, at 12, devoted herself to her studies with renewed vigor, inspired by her older sister's example. And Owen and Gabriela found themselves with occasional moments of unexpected quiet. The house, somehow larger with one less person filling it with energy. "We should travel," Owen suggested one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "Now that the children are older and the ranch has good hands, see some of those places we've only read about." Gabriela considered the idea, surprised to find it appealing. "Where would you want to go first?" "San Francisco," he replied without hesitation. "Remember, I promised to take you there someday back when we were first married." She smiled at the memory. "You did, didn't you?" "Though at the time, I thought it was just a dream that would never happen." "Dreams have a way of coming true for us," Owen said, taking her hand. "Might as well add another to the list." The following spring, with Hope established in her studies, and the twins proving themselves capable ranch managers under the supervision of their foreman, Owen and Gabriela took the train to San Francisco. It was their first real vacation in nearly 20 years of marriage, and they approached it with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, unaccustomed to focusing solely on their own enjoyment. The city by the bay enchanted them both. They stayed in a grand hotel overlooking the water, dined in restaurants finer than anything Aurora could offer, and spent long days exploring the bustling streets and stunning vistas. For 2 weeks, they were simply a couple in love, free from the daily responsibilities that had defined their lives for so long. "I'd forgotten what it's like," Gabriela admitted one evening as they walked along the beach, the setting sun painting the sky in colors that rivaled their Colorado sunsets. "To just be us. Owen and Gabriela, not Ma and Pa Lawson or the ranch owners or committee members." Owen squeezed her hand. "We should do this more often, not let another 20 years go by before we take time for ourselves." 20 years, she echoed, marveling at the passage of time. If anyone had told me on that stormy night that we'd be standing here 2 decades later, I'm not sure I would have believed them. "I would have," Owen said with conviction. "The moment you showed up at that line shack, soaking wet and still determined to deliver a hot meal, I knew you were someone special, someone who could make impossible things happen." They returned to the ranch refreshed and renewed, carrying with them not just memories of San Francisco, but a renewed commitment to balance their responsibilities with time for each other. It was a lesson their children noticed and appreciated, seeing in their parents' relationship a model for their own futures. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Hope completed her education with honors and returned to Aurora not just with her degree, but with a husband, Michael Chambers, a young lawyer she had met in Denver. Together, they established the region's first proper law office, with Hope handling the business aspects while Michael practiced law. The twins, after a brief adventure working cattle drives in Montana, returned to take larger roles in the ranch operations. Samuel eventually married Emma Davis, the schoolteacher's daughter, while James remained a confirmed bachelor, claiming the only bride he needed was the open range. Grace, the youngest, followed her sister's educational path, but chose medicine instead of business. Her decision to attend medical school was met with even more raised eyebrows than Hope's college plans had been, but Owen and Gabriela supported her unwaveringly. In 1905, Dr. Grace Lawson returned to Aurora to establish the town's first proper medical clinic, a far cry from the makeshift arrangements that had served the community in earlier years. Through all these changes, the Lawson Ranch remained the heart of the family, a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, a refuge in times of trouble, and a living testament to what courage and perseverance could achieve. In the summer of 1913, as Owen and Gabriela celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch. 4 children, 3 spouses, 11 grandchildren, and countless friends and neighbors came to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in Aurora. The celebration was held in the same meadow where they had hosted that first alliance anniversary 30 years before. Now, instead of simple tables and a small band, there was a proper pavilion erected for dancing, catering brought in from Denver by train, and even an automobile or two parked among the horses and wagons that still dominated local transportation. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the grounds, Owen led Gabriela onto the dance floor for a waltz. At 66 and 62, respectively, they moved with less speed than in their youth, but with a grace born of decades moving in harmony together. 40 years, Owen murmured as they swayed to the music. Hard to believe, isn't it? Gabriela's eyes sparkled with the same light that had captivated him all those years ago. Not at all, she replied. Some things are simply meant to be. Later, as the celebration continued around them, they slipped away to their favorite spot, a small rise behind the main house that offered a perfect view of the mountains and the valley they had fought so hard to preserve. "I've been thinking," Gabriela said as they settled on the bench Owen had built there years ago, "about that saying that behind every great man is a great woman." Owen raised an eyebrow, wondering where this was going, and I think it's wrong, she continued, "at least for us. You never asked me to stand behind you. From that first day we stood side by side, facing whatever came together." He nodded slowly, considering her words. "That's true, though there were plenty of times you were ahead of me, showing the way forward when I couldn't see it." She laughed softly. "We took turns leading, I suppose. That's what makes a good partnership." "The best partnership," he corrected, taking her hand. Its skin was no longer smooth, marked now by decades of work and weather, but it fit perfectly in his as it always had. "I'd choose you again, Gabriela. Every time." "Even knowing all the hardships?" she asked. "The droughts and blizzards," Morgan schemes, "the times we nearly lost everything." "Especially knowing those things," Owen replied without hesitation, "because I also know how we faced them together, how each challenge made what we built even stronger." From the celebration below, they could hear their grandchildren's laughter mixing with the music, a sound that represented the future they had secured through their efforts. The ranch would pass to the next generation and beyond, carrying forward not just their name but their values and the love that had been its foundation. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen and Gabriela sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, hands intertwined. They didn't need words anymore to communicate the depth of their feelings. 40 years had given them a language all their own, spoken in glances and gestures, in the rhythm of shared breaths, and the perfect understanding that comes only with time. The young woman who had once ridden through the wild wind to bring a lonely cowboy dinner had found not just love but a purpose and a legacy. The cowboy, who had called her braver than himself, had discovered his own courage through loving her. Together, they had written a story greater than either could have imagined alone, a story that would be told in Aurora for generations to come, inspiring others to face their own wild winds with the same courage and determination. As night settled fully over the Colorado plains they had called home for so long, Owen and Gabriela Lawson returned to their celebration, surrounded by the living proof of a love that had not just endured but flourished through 40 years of challenges and triumphs. Their journey, begun on a stormy evening with a simple act of bravery, had become a testament to the power of standing together against whatever life might bring, a lesson as timeless as the mountains that had witnessed their story unfold.